Mary couldn't believe her ears. Her father's last wish, the one thing she needed to honor his legacy and keep his company running, had a single, utterly unexpected stipulation: marriage. The lawyer cleared his throat, repeating the sentence she couldn't wrap her mind around. To inherit the entire company, Mary, you must be married. This requirement is effective immediately and must be fulfilled within the week, or the company will be handed over to charity. Mary's heart sank. She had dedicated every waking hour to building her father's business. She was the one who stayed late, dealt with the clients, and guided the company's vision alongside him. But in all those years, she'd never considered marriage. There was never time, and to be honest, she was selective about her future partner. Now, everything was on the line. When the meeting ended, Mary felt a mix of grief, confusion, and desperation. How was she supposed to find a husband in a week? The thought was absurd. She drove to her best friend Laila's house, hoping for some comfort or, at the very least, a fresh perspective. Mary, you need a husband by next week. Laila blinked in disbelief. I mean, that's a tall order, even for you. Mary laughed bitterly. No kidding. I don't know if I should be angry, confused, or both. Your dad really threw you a curveball, Laila said thoughtfully, drumming her fingers on the coffee table. But maybe there's a way. What do you mean? Laila leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a hint of mischief. Look, we both know you don't have time to date, much less marry for real. But, what if you just pretended? Mary frowned, unsure of where Laila was going with this. Pretend? How exactly? Okay, hear me out, Laila said, her voice dropping to a whisper as if sharing a conspiracy. What if you married someone temporarily? You'd get your inheritance, save your father's company, and no one would be the wiser. Mary's heart raced at the suggestion. Could that actually work? Wait, who on earth would I find to agree to this, and in a week, no less, she asked, disbelief clouding her voice. A sheepish look crossed Laila's face. Well, there's James. Mary's eyes widened. James. As in, your husband. Just listen, Laila urged. James is good-hearted, he's respectful, and he'd only be married to you for a week. Plus, we could all use a little extra cash right now, so the payment wouldn't hurt. Mary felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The plan was unconventional, no, it was downright crazy. But something told her it could actually work. Do you think James would agree to this? Mary asked. Let me talk to him, Laila replied, already pulling out her phone. It will take some convincing, but if anyone could pull this off for you, it's James. Later that evening, Laila sat across from her husband, watching as he processed the proposal. James was skeptical, to say the least. Let me get this straight, he said, raising an eyebrow. You want me to marry Mary? For a week? It's not a real marriage, honey, Laila replied, her tone soothing. It's a business arrangement. Mary needs this to keep her father's company. After a week, the marriage will be dissolved, and we'll have helped her save everything she's worked for. James exhaled, looking away. The idea felt ridiculous to him, like something out of a movie. Yet, he knew how much Mary's father's company meant to her. And the money Laila mentioned, that would help them out a lot right now. I don't know, Laila. It feels wrong somehow, he admitted. Laila took his hand. James, she's my friend. If we don't help her, she could lose everything. And it's only for a week. James finally nodded, a resigned smile tugging at his lips. All right. But just this once. The next day, Mary, James, and Laila met to outline the terms of the arrangement. Mary insisted they create a contract to keep things professional, outlining boundaries and specifying that neither party was to cross any lines. They all signed it, feeling a strange mix of relief and awkwardness as they officially sealed the agreement. James assured Mary that he'd keep the act strictly professional, though he couldn't deny feeling a flicker of unease as he glanced at her across the table. She was beautiful, smart, and driven, qualities he respected in any person, especially a woman. Mary, meanwhile, was determined to focus solely on the goal. She pushed down the odd flutter of excitement that came with having James as her temporary husband. A simple wedding ceremony was planned. Mary's family had to believe it was legitimate, so they prepared for a small yet convincing event. The day was filled with minor, tense moments as Mary and James went over their story, how they met, how they fell in love, and why they had chosen to marry quickly. As the ceremony approached, Mary felt her nerves intensify. Despite her father's stipulation, this was a big deal, and pretending to love someone, even for business reasons, was more challenging than she'd anticipated. James, too, felt a twinge of doubt. He was already married in reality, but here he was, about to take another woman's hand in marriage, even if just for a week. Still, he reminded himself that this was for Mary's benefit, nothing more. The ceremony went by in a blur. With only a few close family members present, they exchanged vows, and Mary found herself struck by how real it all felt, even though she knew it wasn't. She glanced at James, and for a brief moment, their eyes met in a way that felt strangely genuine. James held her hand tightly as they said their vows, each word reminding him of his commitment to his real wife, Laila, but also something unexpectedly warm toward Mary. When they were declared husband and wife, there was a part of him that wanted to pull her close, to make this moment real, but he quickly shook off the thought. This was for Mary's inheritance, nothing more. With the wedding over, the next step in their arrangement was moving in together. Mary and James had agreed that living together, even temporarily, would solidify their story in the eyes of Mary's family. The first night in the house together was quiet and a little awkward. They exchanged polite conversations over dinner, avoiding any personal subjects, and each tried to go about their routine as if nothing was out of the ordinary. But as the days wore on, the line between pretend and real grew harder to maintain. As the days passed, Mary and James settled into a routine, but keeping up the act was harder than either of them anticipated. With Mary's mother visiting frequently to check on the newlyweds, they found themselves constantly having to play the role of a loving couple. Small touches and glances, once awkward, started to feel natural. One evening, Mary caught herself laughing at one of James's jokes. The laughter was real, and the spark in his eyes when he looked at her made her heart skip. But she quickly reminded herself that this was all for show. James, on the other hand, began to see Mary in a new light. Beneath her determined, businesslike exterior, she was warm, funny, and vulnerable. He found himself looking forward to their conversations, forgetting at times that he was married to Laila. Meanwhile, Laila began noticing subtle changes in James. He seemed distracted, more invested in the role than she'd expected. A part of her knew she had pushed him into this for the financial reward, but seeing him and Mary together stirred a flicker of doubt. She couldn't help but feel uneasy as she watched her husband slip into this charade a little too comfortably. One evening, after a tense dinner with James, Laila confronted him. "James, don't forget why you're doing this. It's business, nothing more." James reassured her, but her words lingered in his mind. He tried to remind himself of the boundaries, but it was becoming harder each day. To make their relationship seem more convincing, Mary suggested they go out together to a nice dinner. As they walked into the restaurant, holding hands, she realized that this was the first time she'd gone out with someone who wasn't strictly a business partner. James was attentive, asking about her dreams and interests, genuinely listening in a way that felt refreshing. They laughed over shared stories and even danced when a slow song played. For a moment, they both forgot about the arrangement, lost in the illusion they had created. But as they drove home, silence filled the car, each of them keenly aware of how real everything felt. That night, as they stood at the door to their shared home, Mary turned to thank James for a wonderful evening. But as she looked into his eyes, the words failed her. Instead, an impulse took over, and before she could stop herself, she leaned in and kissed him. The kiss was brief, but it was enough to send a surge of feelings through both of them. James pulled back, a look of shock and confusion in his eyes. "Mary, we can't," he whispered, but even he didn't sound convinced. Mary backed away, mortified. "I'm sorry, James. I don't know what came over me." They both stood there, the weight of their situation crashing down on them. The next day, Mary tried to act as if nothing had happened, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Her feelings for James were growing stronger, and she was terrified. She knew this was temporary, and she couldn't afford to let her heart get involved. James, too, was conflicted. His loyalty to Laila weighed heavily on him, yet he couldn't deny the pull he felt toward Mary. Every time he looked at her, he felt the lines blurring between reality and pretense. Both of them were trapped in a web of emotions they couldn't escape. The closer they got to the end of the week, the harder it was to face the reality that they would soon go their separate ways. On the sixth day, Laila paid an unannounced visit. She noticed the tension between James and Mary, and her suspicions deepened. Pulling Mary aside, she gently reminded her friend of the original purpose behind the marriage arrangement, subtly warning her not to let personal feelings complicate things. Mary felt a pound of guilt, but her feelings for James couldn't be ignored. She assured Laila that everything was fine, but as Laila left, Mary felt torn between her friendship and the emotions she was struggling to suppress. The final day of their marriage arrived, bringing with it a bittersweet sense of relief and sorrow. Mary and James were acutely aware that their time together was coming to an end, yet neither was ready to let go. As they sat together that evening, Mary found herself confessing her fears and doubts about taking over her father's company alone. James listened, offering words of encouragement and support. For a brief moment, Mary wished their arrangement could be real. Unable to hold back any longer, Mary finally confessed her feelings to James. "I know this was just supposed to be for business, but I can't help how I feel. Somewhere along the line, I started seeing you as more than just a friend." James was silent, his own heart in turmoil. "Mary, I feel the same way," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. They both knew that their situation was complicated, and any future together would require painful sacrifices. The next day, Mary's mother arrived to sign the final paperwork, officially transferring the company to Mary. Just as everything was being finalized, Laila burst in, having overheard part of Mary's conversation with James the previous night. Furious and hurt, she confronted them both. James and Mary tried to explain, but Laila felt deeply betrayed by her friend and husband. She stormed out, leaving Mary devastated. Mary was consumed with guilt. She hadn't intended to hurt her best friend, and she knew she had put James in an impossible situation. As she signed the paperwork, securing her inheritance, it felt hollow. She wanted to build her future, but not at the cost of her friendship with Laila. After a difficult conversation with Laila, James made a painful decision. He cared deeply for Mary, but he couldn't turn his back on his marriage. He chose to stay with Laila, hoping that time would heal their wounds. Mary was heartbroken but respected James's choice. She poured herself into her work, determined to honor her father's legacy, yet the memories of the week haunted her. Months passed, and both Mary and James worked on healing. Laila and James attended counseling, trying to rebuild the trust that had been damaged. Mary focused on growing her father's company, finding solace in her success. Though she still missed James, she knew she had to move forward. As Mary threw herself into her work, she eventually met someone who appreciated her for who she was. Slowly, she began to heal, finding happiness again. The week with James would always be a bittersweet memory, but she knew it was time to let go. Laila and James also found a way to move forward, learning to forgive and rebuild their relationship. Though their lives had been tested, they emerged stronger, each person changed by the love and the heartbreak of one unforgettable week. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so you never miss an exciting new story. Your support means a lot, and I look forward to sharing more captivating tales with you. See you in the next video.